Most people think of Camille as this super late game hyper carry dishing out 1,000 true damage at a time, but she actually has one of the strongest early games in the right circumstances. The combination of her E, Hail of Blades, and her passive give birth to one of the most abusive trading patterns I've ever seen. There is genuinely no counterplay to it. You sit in the furthest brush, wait for your enemies to walk into lane, and then stun them with your E. From there, your passive and Hail of Blades do the rest, being able to get 3 autos off insanely fast, then walk away with that massive 20% max health shield from your passive so your enemies can't trade the damage back. And for the rest of the laning phase, it only gets worse. Your Q and W just augment that trading pattern with more utility and damage. Precision Protocol is an auto attack reset that increases the speed and burst of Hail of Blades. Your Tactical Sweep slows enemies, deals % max health damage, and heals you for the damage done. And once you hit 6, your ult becomes the game's strongest form of gank setups, guaranteeing success whenever your jungler visits your lane post 6. But the thing that makes this playstyle so effective and reliable is that it's not just limited to this rinse and repeat trading pattern. In almost every single challenger replay we watched, they spend about 50% of the early game roaming or invading. The damage you output with no items is truly astonishing. I have never seen any support 1v1 a Xin Zhao jungle with no items and a level down, least of all to come out of it with 50% HP and a blue buff. Your E's mobility is also an enormously powerful ganking tool. If you can't find the opportunity to get your trading pattern off against your own laners, moving mid is almost certain to guarantee it, and here's why. From the 4 protruding walls mid lane, she can cover almost every inch of it with her stun, and following that up with an ult pretty much guarantees a kill for either you, your jungler, or your mid lane, because that Ahri is never getting back to the safety of her turret. And now that Brush's entrances are further away, a lot of players play less cautiously since they think they have more time to react to a gank or a roam, which is actually a subtle buff for Camille since she can still reach the edge of those walls from the brush. If I haven't already convinced you of how broken this is, the item build will. Bloodsong is essentially a free replacement for the expensive Sheen items she needs, and it boosts her burst damage by a flat 10%, which allows her to scale her early game damage into the mid game even when she's 2 levels behind. Eclipse's shield synergizes perfectly with her own passive shield, gives the most AD an item can give in the game, and costs next to nothing, which is perfect for the fasting support playstyle. And Sundered Sky gives her even more burst with a sprinkle of healing, which means it's borderline objectively broken. So let's talk about how you can actually abuse it in game. Probably the most consistent aspect of Challenger Camille support gameplay is invading at level 1 every single time. Not only do you have the perfect engage with your E, but also the damage and tankiness to back it up once it lands. On top of that, Camille's E has a secret mechanic which is literally perfect for invading. When you dash toward the wall, you get a nice little indicator which shows you where nearby enemy champions are, and that actually works whether you have vision of them or not. So as you're walking into a potentially precarious brush, you can use your E to check the brush without a ward and either engage straight onto the enemy or back off depending on what you find. Once you get to lane, you're going to want to be aware of your opponent's CC and mobility spells. CC can interrupt your dash and space you far enough from the enemy that you can't get your shield and autos off, and an enemy's dash can achieve the same thing, both of which generally result in a lost trade. You don't just want to throw yourself at the enemy thoughtlessly. Waiting for key cooldowns from your opponents like a Xerath stun guarantees an engage that may otherwise have been interrupted, leaving you fairly vulnerable. And generally, most people kind of auto-react and use their dashes or peel tools whenever you start flying towards the wall, so if you just stick on it for a second, you can bait them out and continue as planned. Another very high-level Camille mechanic is using your E to dodge CC. Whilst your hookshot's initially flying toward the wall, you're essentially immune to crowd control because it will always drag you to the wall afterwards, which is why that blitz hook didn't land and she consequently didn't die. One thing we really need to talk about is roaming and invading. You basically want to be perma-fighting, so you'll want to broaden your horizons and look in places other than your own lane. You can very easily take most junglers early. I can't help but reiterate how massive your damage is. If you can bully an enemy in your own lane to under their turret with a single spell rotation, you can definitely chase and kill a Viego in his own jungle. Neutral objectives are also a constant point of contention on the map. 2 teams battling over an early dragon or herald is the perfect environment for you to be in. Especially since the introduction of grubbies, you have so many more opportunities to be around things people want to fight over throughout the early game, which gives you so many more opportunities to get in there and start snowballing. When it comes to roaming to other lanes, we've already spoken about how easy mid is to gank, but pretty much any lane will do. Camille is insanely good at diving. Your combo does half an opponent's health bar, and you can usually tank about 3 tower shots before you're dead, which makes diving much more more likely to succeed. The changes to Summoner's Rift really opened up the map in both bot and mid lane, which really encourages this proactive diving playstyle which Camille does so well. Her E is the perfect engage, her ult locks down enemies, dodges CC, and resets tower aggro. She's kind of the ideal diving champion really, and her ability to roam so easily means she can dive every lane. One mechanic you can really take advantage of here is the E flash mechanic. Essentially, after initiating the second part of your E, you flash right at the end of it, bringing the stun with you instantly, which makes it impossible to dodge. In a lot of replays we watch, challenger players use this either as a form of course correction in case they miss the target, or as a way of extending the range of her E for ganking or initiating a fight, or as a way of making her E impossible to react to in a dive. On a similar note, the ult isn't just this powerful diving tool, it's also extremely good for lockdown for pretty much any catch you make where your teammates can follow up quickly. Like in this clip, there's just no universe where Senna gets out of this alive. It can also be used as a great form of peel for your ADC. Because Camille ults Xin here, he can't actually get onto Ashe even with his extended dash range because of the ult boundaries. And these are effectively the lessons you need to take forward into the mid game. Because your strength primarily comes from your base damages and hail of blades, you can eventually get outscaled. If you've been really successful in the early game, you can 100% still get away with the same one-shot technology used at the beginning of the game, and that's why it's so important to not play support Camille like you would play her top, because you need to get ahead and get items so you can keep up with the rest of the game. All being outscaled really means to you is taking a break from 1v1s until you get some more items. So you essentially become a pick machine, using your E to catch people out of position, hit them with a burst of damage, and lock them in place with your ult for the rest of your team to follow up on. Even early on, your catch power makes it dangerous for the enemy to ward safely, which is an extremely powerful mental game. Because you don't need to farm or be in any lane in particular, you could be around any corner, and the fact you can follow that up with a shocking amount of damage constantly keeps your enemies guessing. The same practice then continues into the late game, but once you get a Sundered Sky, you're not just limited to catching people. Even though she's 2 levels down here, she can still very comfortably 1v1 the Xin Zhao by weaving in and out and waiting on her cooldowns. You almost want to play it as tactically as an Akali would, and that 10% bonus damage from Bloodsong really makes up the difference in levels, so she can tackle priority targets like Smolder without worrying about the 2-level deficit. When it comes to rounding out your build, there are effectively 4 core options. Sterak's is the perfect union of survivability, damage, and health, which makes diving into the backline so much less dangerous for you. Titanic Hydra feels about the same, but instead of a massive shield to keep you alive, you sub in another auto-attack reset with more burst damage on it. Frozen Heart is incredibly cheap for the tanky stats and attack speed slow it gets you, which suits a support's income, but buying it depends on the main damage sources from the enemy team. And Knight's Vow falls into the same sort of category of being very tanky and very cheap. There is just one more thing though. Camille support loves playing from brushes, and there is a super secret cheese tactic challenger players use, which is honestly just brilliant. And it's basically faking a recall. You want to edge a single pixel out of the brush and start recalling whilst being in full vision, and then at the last second, walk back into the brush. It's especially convincing on Camille because her recall animation shoots her into the sky, but I swear this works pretty much every time, especially if you practice the timing. This basically means you can guarantee some more aggressive trades or setups for your jungler. Your opponent will walk up thinking you've based, so you always have the element of surprise. All you need to do is check the brush for vision before you try it, otherwise you just look like an idiot. The degree to which it's convincing is probably best illustrated by watching these 3 separate recalls outside the brush, and you tell me which one you think is still in the brush.